change, my friend, is anybody's guess. So I'm watching and I'm waiting, hoping for the best. Even think I go to praying every time I hear them saying that there's no way to delay that trouble coming every day. No way to delay that trouble coming every day.
So, welcome to Liberal Buzz. I appreciate your tuning in. I know it's dinner time. We've got a lot to cover today, and not much time. I've got a phone guest, Carol Harvey, who is giving us a lot of information that she's been gathering about Treasure Island, and she's a good advocate for a lot of people that are being poisoned there by the toxic waste. So she's got a lot of information about she's got a friend named Liz, and Liz couldn't be a guest today because she's too ill from the toxicity. So we've got a lot to cover about that, and very little time, so this might take several shows. The social workers get 2 to 5K bonuses per adoption for the kids that are taken away from the toxic. They're not admitting it's toxic waste. They're saying the kids are sick because they've been abused by their parents. All of them. So that's just the odds are just way against that. Now I'm going to go to my Twitter very fast. I want you to give me a follow, and I'll follow you back. That's our Child Protective Services. Oh, there's Carol there. Carol.
Yeah. Hi, Denise.
Hi.
Ready?
Well, I'd prefer you call in the station, please.
Well, I thought I was calling the station. Oh, sorry. Oh, let me do that right now.
Okay, thanks. Cheers. So anyway, the topic is Child Protective Services uses CAPTA to traffic kids poisoned on Treasure Island. They get each kid taken, they get between a $2,000 and $5,000 bonus per kid. Carol, okay, you got the correct line now.
Yes, good.
Great.
So are we on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Where do you want me to start? Let me just tell you. I'll just start. I want to tell you today about Liz Washington, who is a young mother with 4 children who got trapped on Treasure Island. Do you want me to tell you how that happened?
Please. Well, I understand she came from Chicago to escape from Chicago's gangs. Let's get a
Yes, she did. In the late 90s, she had 2 young children, and her family's from Chicago, and she realized she raised those kids there. They were going to be in danger from gangs, the Chicago gangs. So she thought, since she had relatives in San Francisco, and San Francisco was probably a little safer for the kids, she would come. And when she came, she got caught in yet another San Francisco housing crisis, and she ended up homeless. So, but she managed to stay in hotels, in SROs, and but while looking for real housing. And this is a mother who got caught up with Child Protective Services, who once she was in one of these hotels, she had gone to a couple of nonprofits to help her find housing, and instead they sent the police to her hotel. And the police barged in with their hands on guns as if it was a shootout, and they just took her kids. And she said, why?
Yeah.
And they said, because you're homeless. And they grabbed her child.
Living in an SRO is considered homeless, but I don't see why that's a barrier. There's plenty of homeless kids.
That's right, and she was paying rent. She was paid up with rent. The other charge they had against her, when they couldn't make that stick, was that her kids weren't in school, but her kids were in school. And so they grabbed her kids. There were 3 of them, an infant, a nursing infant, and they put him in a police car and took him to San Francisco General Hospital. And from there, the kids were put into foster care. After being in the foster care unit for a week, they put in foster care, and during that whole time, she didn't know where they were. For about 3 weeks, she didn't know anything about where they were. So, want me to go ahead?
Please do.
Okay. So she then saw the kids. Once kids are in foster care, parents can't visit them, and they don't know where they are. And they found a place for her to visit her kids, and she was, of course, desperate. I mean, these were young kids, and one was a baby. And so she then was told by Child Protective Services that she couldn't have her kids back unless she got technically, quote-unquote, housed. So she saw Treasure Island on a Section 8 list in the Housing Authority offices, and she went there and signed up for that, got some support for that monetarily, got her Section 8, and one day going out there on the bus, she talked to a naval officer who told her, you shouldn't move out here because it's radioactive. So she had to move. She couldn't not move because they wouldn't let her have her kids back, and her kids were still... she still didn't have them at that point, and also the stress from all of this caused her to miscarry yet another child during that summer. It was really tragic. So then she didn't back out. She went out to Treasure Island and sort of in fear, but she pushed it to the back of her mind about the chemicals and radiation, asbestos, mold, and lead that the Navy left there. The Navy decommissioned the island in 1997, and they claimed to be cleaning it up. But the city...
I remember.
The city decided they wanted to solve the homelessness problem, so they invited a bunch of people, homeless people out there, gave them subsidies, and promised them that they would have this housing, but they did not. They neglected to tell them about the radiation, chemicals, asbestos, mold, and lead. Nobody knew. They knew there were some problems that they didn't know specifically what they were.
And it turns out to be 10 of the 12 most dangerous chemicals, besides how many different types of radiation?
They got about 26 kinds of radiation and about 24 kinds of chemicals that the Navy dumped in the soil during its about 50 years of, having that as a naval base. They were actually doing radiological experiments on the island. And there are radiation and chemicals all laced throughout that soil. It's silt. It's a very thin layer of dust, because that is a man-made island. And it's just filled with every kind of toxin you can imagine, just like at Bayview Hunters Point. It's the same kind of thing. So about a couple of years after moving on to the island, Liz discovered that her family had a whole bunch of things wrong. They were getting sick all the time. And basically 2 groups of things were happening to them. They had respiratory problems, and they kept getting gastrointestinal problems.
And what about the child who was the child that Liz Washington had given birth to while she was living on the island? The child that grew up on the island was the sickest one because his immune system wasn't developed enough to be able to ward these things off.
That's right.
And what about when her other 2 children moved to Oakland? Sometime later, they were taken away from and put in foster care in Oakland in a drug bin or whatever.
Yeah, what happened was, okay, this is the second part of the story. The problem that Liz has...
move away from your TV.
Oh, I'm not near a TV.
Oh, we're getting feedback. Anyway,
it's sort of stopped now.
So she was, it did. So she wasn't told it was toxic.
No, she wasn't. But slowly, it dawned on her, kids were getting these illnesses, and so was she. As a matter of fact, she was going to come to the show today, but her immune system, after all this time, is so compromised that she was too sick to come. She's in the middle of a terrible flu and a cold right now. So is her youngest son. You asked about the youngest son, the one that was born on the island.
Michael.
Yeah, he's the only one with asthma so bad that he vomits. You can have asthma. There are a lot of people who have it. When they have crises, they don't vomit. He vomits.
Well, let's talk about CPS's flimsy rationalizations camouflaged as a child trafficking scheme targeting her two youngest sons for foster care and adoption.
Yeah, let's talk about CAPTA, CAPTA, which stands for the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which was federal legislation that was originally intended to address child abuse and neglect. But unfortunately, that money is being used in a child trafficking scheme, which means that a whole layer of judges and CPS, Child Protective Service workers, and their bosses, court-appointed lawyers, and a bunch of other entities make a lot of money, and adoption agencies, by taking kids from their families, making up these hokey excuses like your kids are homeless, they're not in school, your house is messy. They just grab the kids and they put them in foster care sequentially with the ultimate goal of selling them into adoption. And all these people make money off of it.
The adoptive parents pay a lot per child.
Yes. And the courts, the judges, the Child Protective Services supervisors, the CPS workers make a lot of money from this. The CPS workers make a bonus for every child that is put into foster care or adopted of between $2,500 and $5,000. That's per child.
And tell us about how there's more adoptions, more confiscations of children at the end of the fiscal year.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Liz, who is a really intelligent researcher herself, found out that most of the children are taken in at the end of the fiscal year in the summertime. May, June, July, around in that area. And babies go for the highest amount of money, then kids 4 to 6 for the next highest amount of money, with teenagers you don't make as much off of them.
It's almost like they're treating them like cattle.
Yeah, and actually Liz has had 15 years of battling with this system. Child Protective Service workers have visited her home 3 times and stolen her kids 3 times over 15 years. The last child theft happened in 2014 of her 2 youngest sons, the ones that are the most negotiable, or teenagers. So they grabbed them on the pretext that the house was messy. No, that was the one where they were taken directly from the hospital. The kids have serious gastrointestinal problems. That's interesting, too, because Treasure Island has an infrastructure of pipes with all kinds of chemicals and radiation and all kinds of toxins in it. And the people on the island are drinking this polluted water. And many islanders have gastrointestinal problems, and those 2 boys have serious gastrointestinal difficulties. They have to go to the hospital on a regular basis.
So those pipes are 70 years old, rusty, cracked, and leaking, and they did some compacting of the soil called Vibro compaction.
Yep. This happened in May of this year. The City Fathers have decided, actually it is an organization started by Willie Brown called the Treasure Island Development Authority that has TIDA. And actually the mayor really controls that. Ed Lee controls that. Willie Brown controls the mayor. Ed Lee controls that. And Jane Kim as well. I don't mind naming names. These people are all complicit in this. They're all hiding this. So what they're going to do is try to build high-rises on it. Treasure Island has fabulous views, and they're now redeveloping it with the intention of building these high-rises and making condos and making a ton of money off this place. They're actually starting groundbreaking in 2016. Navy's supposed to be cleaning it off, but they're dragging their feet. They're really not doing it at all.
Oh, boy. No, of course. And let's have a side note. If we did it right, the radiation has a half-life of 1,500 years.
You can't clean radiation off of anything.
No.
They ground in Treasure Island, which again is fill. It's a man-made island. It's silt, basically. Has cesium-137 in it. Cesium-137 has a half-life of 1,600 years. You cannot clean that stuff out of there. And a half-life means it divides by half, so it's way longer than 1,600 years.
Yeah. The half-life is, you still get sick after 1,500 years, the half-time of the 3,000 years or whatever it
That
takes
is correct. And there have been many whistleblowers who've gone on there and proved. There was an NBC report by a guy who did environmental radiation cleanup called Don Wadsworth, who blew the whistle on there being levels of radiation so high in one area that being close to it you can be burned. So, at any rate, you asked about the Vibro compaction. They sunk bores down into this fragile soil, and they are vibrating bores. And they did this in May of 2015. And as a result of that, there was a test to see if they could do it, and the test failed. They were trying to shake the soil down so they could build these high-rises on compact soil.
Which caused which caused a line of sinkholes.
Yeah, I was going to say that sinkholes and broken pipes all over the island.
And that day, there was brown stuff coming out of people's faucets and through their electrical outlets?
Yes, and this was in more than one house. People had feces running out of their faucets, coming up through their toilets, all over their floors. And believe me, the feces is laced with chemicals and radiation. I mean, they don't have potable water on Treasure Island, and bottled water is the only substitute. Very expensive for people who are on subsidies.
Well, now the maintenance concealed a documented sinkhole with asphalt. They concealed it, a documented sinkhole with asphalt from the Vibro compaction to experiment with soil compaction that broke the pipes, like we said. And no attorney? What about attorneys?
Well, yes.
Doctors?
Yeah. The sad thing about this is that the Department of Public Health is basically the health experts in San Francisco have said we can't do a longitudinal study of the people who are ill because it's 15 years isn't long enough and we don't have enough cases. I know 50 people, 50 families who are ill. Yeah, the best way to address this is for people to get private attorneys to start lawsuits. And believe me, these people have been intimidated enough that they're really afraid
to show their identities or their faces on this show. Actually,
that's absolutely true.
Yes, and no attorney, no public defender. You can't use a public defender.
Well, the CPS is half the story, and we're advising women, and Liz Washington directed this at mothers who've had problems with Child Protective Services, and her advice to them is to ask their friends and family to do a crowdsourcing, fundraising project so that they can raise money for good attorneys who can go into those courts and know the CPS system, the Child Protective Services system, and can defend them because the judges and these Child Protective Service workers do not respect anybody but private attorneys.
They're all in on it. There's too much money per child, $5,000.
That's right.
They have no motivation.
And if they come in with a private attorney, they get treated with respect. And also we advise these mothers to document everything and write a letter to the court defending themselves and get that in before they have to appeal because they need all this documentation for any appeal they need to get their children back if they've been taken.
And we could get a GoFundMe. They can't afford to move either.
No, they can't afford to move off the island. If you're on a subsidy where you're paying $90 a month, how are you going to move? Where are you going to go? You're not going to go to San Francisco.
It's almost like it's like a prison out there.
That's right. They are captives.
It's the new island prison in the bay.
That is correct. It's kind of like Alcatraz, only none of these people have done anything wrong.
Well, I was just talking to a former guest on the show. They were talking about Treasure Island on the last show. I got her phone number, so I'll call her about it. But she was talking about the prison having an agreement with some people. I can't remember I didn't get the name, but they had an agreement to house some prisoners on Treasure Island.
Oh yeah, there actually are. They're saying that they're helping people. They have veterans on Treasure Island. There's an organization called Tie-Dye, the Treasure Island Homeless Development Initiative, where under their umbrella they're helping all kinds of people. From their women who have been paroled from prison, they're veterans, there are lots of people who are going through rehab out there, and while they're going through rehab, they're being subjected to these poisons. So it's yes, I know.
Don't take drugs, but don't smoke weed, but just sit with this poison. That's legal.
That's right. The first day I was out in Treasure Island a year and a half ago, I talked to a veteran. I did a video of a veteran, and I said, "You know about the poison on Treasure Island?" He said, "Sure." He said, "You can taste it in the water." And he said, "I'm getting off in 2 years, so I hope not too much damage will be done before I leave." So, these are veterans. They've gone to wars. They fought for us. Then they come back, and they have post-traumatic stress disorder, which they try to medicate with drugs and alcohol. They go into rehab, and they get subjected to chemical poisons and radiation.
Which makes people want to medicate to get rid of the pain.
That's right. And I think that veterans all over the country ought to be outraged about these programs. They're not only on Treasure Island, they're also in other places where the Navy has polluted it.
Oh.
So, because it's part of the deal that these places that are being revealed.
10 seconds.
I'm sorry?
5 seconds.
Yeah.
Got to wrap it up. When's the next show is on October 15th. Bye-bye, Carol. Thanks for a great show.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.